speak at the Rotary Club Madras South on the occasion of International Women's Day. And I have to say that I've been invited to many venues and never so enthusiastically. Over a period of 2 weeks, Mr. Madhu and I have exchanged several emails, and the question paper kept getting very complicated. So this morning, and I say it with warmth and affection, I don't say it in a pejorative way at all. This morning I took all the various elements of the question paper and put them together, and I asked my colleague, what am I going to do with this? So my attempt to answer the various parts of this, although he assured me I did not have to and that the questions were all optional, you know, I'm a little compulsive about these things. You give me an assignment, then I must finish it. So I divided my talk into 3 parts, broadly following along the various briefings I got. The first is an overview of the status of women in India today. The second is to talk briefly about legal protections, which is, I think, a very important concern that kept recurring through the emails. And then I added a third part, which is to really leave you with my wish list for the coming year, which I will confess will be a bit of an impossible dream wish list, but what are wish lists for, right? You don't have a wish because it'll be realistic. So before I start, I want to talk about why 2020 is very special. For those of us working in gender equality, now apparently it's also 100 years since women in America got the vote. I bought myself a calendar last year, and the January 1 blurb on it was 100 years since we got the vote. Also 75 years of the United Nations. 40 years of the convention, just about 40 years of the convention for the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, a document which adapts the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in a gender-specific way. 25 years since the adoption of the Beijing Platform for Action, which was the first comprehensive look at women's rights, equating them with human rights. This is Hillary Clinton's famous speech, Women's Rights Are Human Rights. And the Beijing Platform encompasses the gamut of human experiences, from what happens to you as a child in the home, all the way to what happens to you in a war situation. 20 years since the passage of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which mandates the inclusion of women in all stages of conflict and peace processes. 5 years since the commencement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is really, seriously a year of stock taking, and it's a little overwhelming because every morning you turn on the computer and there are 3 new reports. Luckily, they have many of the same statistics. So, you know, one isn't looking at one number here and one entirely different number here. They're drawing from the same pool. But the fact that everybody feels, all of us who work in this area feel like, okay, this is a year we need to grab and hold. And that's the thing about a day like International Women's Day. I'll just digress from my notes, because I'm not sure this is familiar to everybody. You know, the origins of this day are actually in the labor movement. It was a labor activist from Germany who felt that there were distinct women's issues in the context of trade union rights, and that these needed to be highlighted, and perhaps we needed one day to focus on them. So the origins of International Women's Day are an International Working Women's Day. So from the get-go, it's been an advocacy day, it's been a campaign day, it's been a working day for all of us, rather than what it has actually become in 2020, which is a bit of ironically, a capitalist, patriarchal kind of day, you know. Be nice to the ladies, open the door, give a red rose. I was at a UN conference last week, and all was well. It was gender and small arms and light weapons and room packed with feminists. And at the end, the director of the center gave us red roses because Women's Day was coming. I mean, you know, nice man, but you clearly haven't read the manual on this, despite being from the UN. So this is something that we reckon with all the time, working in this area. You don't know whether to say, okay, thank you, it's a very nice thought, or to say, Go out, take a morcha, do something, read a report, send out 10 campaign fighting tweets, shake your fist in the air. So anyway, I want to, in the spirit of stock taking, we prepared a small briefing table. The Committee on the Status of Women meets at the United Nations every March for 2 weeks, right after Women's Day. And there are two levels of all UN gatherings. There are the official meetings, where representatives of countries come together and pass a political declaration, which is prepared months in advance. And there are always shadow meetings and meetings on the side which involve civil society. And the transnational women's movement is very, very strong. It has been for over 100 years. So a couple of our friends from Tamil Nadu were going. They had been in Beijing. So they wanted to go for this meeting because it was very special. And we prepared a briefing table for them by pulling in some numbers. In this sort of spirit of taking stock and looking at numbers, I just want to pull out a couple of numbers. Everything looks official if you give numbers, So, pregnant women who are, I'm just randomly choosing from this full page. Someone really wants, I'll email you the table. Pregnant women who are anemic, and this is a 2017 number, 50%. 2020, India is shining. 50% of pregnant women are still anemic, which means what? They're not getting enough food, they're not getting the right food. They're still not eating enough keera, enough beetroot, drinking enough milk. Okay? 2020. Literacy rate of women as per the 2011 census, 64.6%. So what about 35%? What happened to them? 70 years after independence? And then there are people you know and I know that because we hire them, we employ them, we meet them, we're related to them. They go through an entire schooling, but you give them a document to read and it takes a very long time. A few years ago I flew back from Kuala Lumpur and I was talking to somebody about it and she said, how is it that you are arriving before you left? She had been taught geography in school, but it hadn't registered that this is how longitudes work, this is how time zones work. So this is the quality of education we have. So the literacy figure is indicative. Maternal mortality, we now spend, also like Women's Day, we celebrate Mother's Day, which also, by the way, was a campaign date. It was for world peace. Maternal mortality, because we care about mothers so much, we, Aarti Irtifai, Mere Paas Maa Hai, all of that. Maternal mortality is 130 women per 1,000. 130 women out of every 1,000 that give birth are dying. This is a ridiculous number in 2020. So, there's a page full of numbers. There's also the fact that labor force participation is dropping. Why is it dropping? Women are supposed to be going out there and working. This is huge, unfortunately in India not quite 50% of the population, because sex ratio is also not balanced. So this large pool of able-bodied human beings who could be working for themselves, also for the economy, not working. Work that they do is not paid, therefore it doesn't count in the GDP. So these numbers are, there is all the good news. And the parts that were read out from my article were all the optimistic parts. Sometimes, when you have 900 words, you don't want to fill people with doom. After all, they may not call me back to write a column after that. One has to look out for oneself. But the truth is that the picture is really quite dismal for a lot of people. I mean, if I looked at my own life and made the assessment, I would have a lot of putty complaints. But the fact is, my life is quite decent. I'm a very lucky person. But what is life like out there? And that's, I think, the measure. It's Gandhi's measure. What, is this good for the most deprived, the most dispossessed, the most disenfranchised person you know? And by that reckoning, we have a long journey ahead. So I want to tell you some of the things that we hear in the course of our work. So we do these things called community cafes, where we invite ourselves to your building. Please call us to your building. And we come and we sit, and it's usually in the parking room or this community room or whatever. And we chat for 1 hour on Sunday evening about gender-based violence. Because these are not conversations we have at home. Whatever has happened in our families, the moody marachi, what to do, ayathu, poyachi. We don't talk. So generation after generation of young women discover violence as a shock. They hear the strictures, idu pannada, but they don't know why. Because we don't talk about it. And everything we say is couched in euphemisms. You know? Something happened, avale kettuta. What does kettuta mean? I mean, I always want to know. Is this person paalu, tairu, rasam? How do you spoil a human being? Not possible. You don't say rape, because rape is in there. Okay, so we have this conversation, and our goal is twofold in the conversation. One is to use these words, so people feel the full force of their violence. And the second is to tell people how to intervene. So we say, we'd love to come to your house or your society to talk about gender violence. And people say, such a good idea, you must come, but you know, can you do the workshop for our maids? All of them have such sad stories. And if we say it to men, they say, you see, the men in our society are quite liberal. We allow our women to do what they please. And at that point, the Prajna team members say, take a deep breath. And then they say, in fact, you might say we are the oppressed ones. Now the thing is that violence and the experience of violence, the anticipation of violence, the legacy of violence, is the lowest common denominator of women's experiences. You know, there's a UN statistic, and at the Yengenda Vandadhan we can't tell, but 1 in 3 women have experienced violence in their lifetime. 1 in 3. Look at this room. And the 1 in 3 left, 1 in 4 is ever going to talk about it. So what are the odds you will even know? Whatever has happened to us, you are very unlikely to ever find out. So you're, as men, as our friends, as our family, you have to make the assumption that everybody here is carrying some trauma inside them and adjust your worldview accordingly. But the point I want to make is, what do we expect? When you say violence, what is our expectation? According to the law, domestic violence, and I use it because it's the broadest definition, includes physical violence, so it's the beating, sexual violence, economic violence, it's that thing where you say, you know, give me your jewelry, I'll keep it in my safe, give me your passport, it's the control over the strings. Emotional violence, adikadi amma veetukku yen pore, kalyanam aayithu, why do you want to meet your friends all the time? Your whole world should revolve around me. And this is the one that is most insidious, verbal violence. You know those, in our society, and I'm sure nobody in this room does it, our sense of humor.
How sure are you?
See, you have invited me, I have had your gulab jamun, I have had your gulab. I have to say these things.
No, I mean, I am being abused.
I already quoted you, know. The jokes that men crack about wives, about mothers and mothers-in-law. No, it is not. I mean, actually, see, we are laughing at it in part because women are used to making you comfortable all the time. So we will smile politely, but let me tell you, it's not comfortable. It's not always funny, you know? And you don't say it because the man cracking the joke is, not only do we have gender hierarchies, we have age hierarchies. We have all these silly rules, you know, so we never say, this is not funny. Okay, this is insulting. We don't say it to each other, but the jokes are also a form of verbal abuse, and there is one particular kind I want to point to called gaslighting. It's those jokes you make. Why are you talking politics with her? She reads the paper but she doesn't understand anything. How do you know? Maybe her perspective is different. Maybe her understanding is different. Maybe it's deeper. You're just bothered about Scindia, Enna Panna, Gandhi, Enna Panna. Maybe your understanding of the issues is far more fundamental than yours. See, but this kind of thing that we do, kuttu, and you decimate a person's self-esteem. So by the time, you've been married 7 to 10 years, they basically think that they're like a shurane. I see, actually, I don't know anything about this. Of course, I'm asking you a simple question. Green chair is better than red chair? Anybody knows the answer to this. Everyone has a preference. But I don't know, ask him. This is a form of verbal abuse. Now, so my whole speech is not going to be about gaslighting. Although it could, quite frankly, you would be surprised who does it, to whom, at what level it happens, at what stage in your life it continues to happen. And if people took each other to the police station over it, there would be a lot of FIRs that police would have to check. But that is at home, what can you do? Number culture. Outside, all is well. Right? Women are educated. When they take up professions, they're top most in their field. Gold medal win pandra, rank allan top pandra, all is well in the world outside. A few weeks ago, I heard a professional woman say, I tell you, there is only a glass ceiling if you look up and choose to see it. This makes me think, though, of all the women in local politics. For 30 odd years ago, we came up with a panchayat level reservation for women, which flooded the panchayats with women, many of whom became leaders. They took the initiative, young women, straight out of college, straight out of 2022, they became panchayat leaders, sarpanches, took decisions about civic needs in their village, in their area, developed aspirations, had a vision of their own for this country, and have run around looking for assembly tickets. And then we come to, a person like me comes to a gathering like this sort of conference, and we say, so we meet a politician, we say, why don't you nominate more women? And they say, Yendama, we would love to nominate more women, but where are the qualified women? And you think, okay, now one, you're never asking me about qualified men. Men, like by virtue of Y chromosome, are qualified for everything in this society. But then how are you not seeing the women? How are you not seeing, why has it taken so long for Jyotimani Sennimalai to get into parliament? She entered the panchayat circuit a long time ago. All of us have known her. We know her as bright, as feisty, as articulate, as capable. But she's cultivated an assembly constituency on a remote promise and not got it. Why does this happen? Why does Salma not have a ticket? Why is she not in an assembly? These are amazing women, and in Tamil Nadu, one of the privileges of the work that I've got to do has been to meet them. The US, many of us have connections in the US, twice now passed over women with dream CVs. If you line up Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren's curriculum vitae, honestly, you do have to work a whole lifetime to achieve that. But they were not good enough to be president. So Arvind Kejriwal, the Indian Liberals' dream from 10 years ago, one person who represented what was good about the AAP government in Delhi, Atishi, not in his cabinet. He couldn't find qualified, capable women either, surprisingly. This is politics. In the corporate sector, abdina kadiyadu. Corporate sector le merit tha. And once you educate girls, no one can hurt them. But for this, they must work in reputable firms. They must not do night shift. Remember that Hyderabad girl? Night shift lena taniya pona yenna vannalu ahala. So they must be in your house in the corner room, Chamatta, 9 to 5, office ku poitu vandu tiffin set order, not accommodating the changing nature of this economy, not you are sending them to engineering schools, proud of their gold medals, but you want them to come back and work like they're giving 10 to 5 tuition in time to keep the pressure cooker for you. Rupal Dayal Bajaj, the first high-profile workplace sexual harassment case in India 30 odd years ago, IAS officer, Punjab cadre. Who harassed her? The DGP. So, rank, class, education, no bar. But violence is a real problem. But the thing is also sometimes when you work in this area, you think, there's more to me than my body. And if there's more to me than my body, if there are aspirations, there are economic needs, there are all of those things, then I need to be not talking about violence alone. So I want to talk a little bit about exclusion before moving on. And I just wanted to list different kinds of segregation exclusion. Menstruation. This morning my cousin wrote a poem about it, so it was on top of my mind when I wrote this. Having people sit separately. Don't do this, don't do that. Don't eat, don't cook. We are very good at scientific explanations for everything, so let's not talk about those. But I'm just saying, what is the effect of that? 5 days in a week, don't do anything. People still observe this. You have a family gathering, first Banti, all the men. What is left, because we don't raise men to see Patratla Yavrisha Padirka, what is left is shared by the women. We still do this in our houses. We still do this in our houses. The absence of women in boardrooms, and I'm mixing this up on purpose. Absence of women in the leadership pipeline, you can say, adutha generation kulla boardroom ku vanduruva, but second tier le yaar irka, third tier le yaar irka. What is the mobility from entry to middle tier leadership positions? It's actually still really poor. And because women step out of the market briefly to have children, they relocate when their husbands relocate, because we have patrilineal, male-focused family lives. The trade-off is always with the women's career. Right? Letting women speak in a professional setting, but not listening to them. How many times does it happen, if you're working women in this room, you know this, you work outside the home, I mean, that you have an idea or an argument, and you say it, and it's like, kanathila kallu potta pole. And 10 minutes later, some man will make a shadow of the same argument and say, brilliant, sir, how many times? Too many times. Exclusion from places of worship, Shabarimala is one example. But many of our small, Ur Kovil, we all have, there are all kinds of rules, Ilya. Social exclusion of widows and single women. Widows still get excluded from the traditional social circuit in India. You've already lost a person around whom your life probably revolved, and suddenly nobody will call you for a wedding, for a puja, for a navaratri, for a nombu. Why? We still do this. I just want to say, India has not changed a whole lot. And by the way, this is something that was happening in my grandmother's time. My grandmother and her sister, one of the legends in my family, is that they were in Rangoon, and Shankaracharya came and they said, widows should not go. So these two young girls, must have been 12 and 13, said, Namalu Varamato. So, I mean, this is not a new issue, is it? And unfortunately, in 2020, I'm still standing here and talking about it. And there's one last example I want to give, because it's a very simple one. There's a meeting and there's a coffee session, and say you and I are chatting, and 3 men come and they want to talk to you. Before you know it, you will be in a circle and I will be outside. It's real. Now, in a social setting, I may say Nimmadi, now I can have a better conversation. But in a professional setting, what it means is that the conversation you are having about the company, the work, the policy, I am cut out of. And you're not my brothers or my husband or anything. I can't elbow you and say, Tarle, Nanu ingane. I am physically unable to push you and make room for myself. And you are oblivious, so I remain on the outer circle the entire time. So I want you to think, and I want you to notice a all the different forms of exclusion, and of course structural exclusion, better food, prioritizing the health care of men and boys, offering better educational opportunities to sons, telling daughters, now I also have to spend on your wedding. I will come to this wedding spending in a bit. Limits on the mobility of girls. A lifetime of undermining the confidence of girls. Now, we've been working with young women for a long time, and I'm coming around to the view that the bottom line is that we don't make them confident enough. They should be able to say to young men, women, aunties, uncles, to hell with you. This is my life, this is my choice, this is my view. But we bind them with these rules about adjustment and good behavior and good girl and maryade for older people, maryade for random people. Tata Madri may put a hand on her butt, but maryade, she has to put up with it. We are just like, as you can tell, I feel quite strongly about these things. So what are the legal protections women enjoy? We've been very law fixated for about 200 years now. The very first social reformers, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, all of them focused a great deal on legal solutions, bans, enabling laws and so on, in order to get the changes that they thought necessary, abolition of sati, widow remarriage, whole lot. And women's movement has also kept that up. So the result is we have a library of laws that are always 2 steps ahead of society. And I want to talk about what these laws are, but I also want to signal already that when that happens, then we need to ask about the efficacy, the utility of the laws also. So I'm going to give you 3 categories of law. I won't do law by law by law, we'll never leave. When you look for laws that enable and protect women in India, you have to start with the preamble to the Indian Constitution, which it just fills my heart with joy that in the last 1 year, more of us have read the preamble more times than we ever did before. And we need to seat that preamble deep in our heart, because it is the essence of who we are and who we want to be and who, frankly, we should be. Preamble and the chapter on fundamental rights, both of which reflect the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and subsequently are echoed in CEDAW, the Convention to Eliminate Discrimination, the International Covenant on Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Then there's a host of personal and property rights, including family law, divorce law, inheritance law. All of these are also enabling factors, and women in India now do have the right to inherit equally, as you know. Okay? There is a history to personal law and the personal law Uniform Civil Code debate in India, which is distinct from the debates in countries around us. But let me not go into that for the moment. And then there are the laws addressing violence, whether they are the IPC, Indian Penal Code provisions with regard to cruelty, rape, sexual harassment, or specific laws like the laws on prenatal diagnostics, which apply to testing for sex selection, domestic violence, workplace sexual harassment, and dowry. Every time there's a gruesome incident of gender-based violence, we sit in our living rooms and we lament about the laws. What is this law? Law Verno, strict down a law Verno. We should have stronger laws, we say. We should have quick court trials. We should have severe and exemplary punishment. We should get rid of avaricious lawyers. Are there lawyers in this room?
Yes.
See, are you avaricious? I'm sure you're not. We should get rid of avaricious lawyers, lazy judges, corrupt policemen. Terrible, terrible. I'll grant you that for the moment. But I want to give you the example of the Dowry Prohibition Act, which is older than me, and I'm now quite old, passed in 1961. It is almost 60 years old. Senior citizen status, airline discount, front seat, maryade, all of that. But do you know that since the passage of the law, the practice of dowry has spread to communities that never had it? It has spread to bride price communities. So where men were paying to get a bride, they are now taking dowry. Because dowry is a status symbol. Young girls that we meet in colleges, in the posh colleges of Madras, tell us, ma'am, in the olden days, and they usually mean 1975, and I don't know where to look after that. Women did not have any property, so they were given dowry. Dowry is actually called Stridhan. Necessarily, I'm here to teach, I'm here to teach, take a deep breath. But the practice of giving has been so normalized, especially in post-liberalization India, that young 19-year-olds tell me, this is our culture, this is our tradition. And I'm sitting there, 55 years old, on a stage, Gudichindu, no, it's not our culture, no, it's not our culture. And then I just sound like a hysterical auntie, which I am. But the fact is that we thought we were done and dusted with this, no? We thought dowry was gone. We thought dowry was a bad word. But dowry is not a bad word anymore. And ostentatious weddings. I had a young lady tell me last year, I can't tell my parents I want a simple wedding because, what power do I have? And I thought, if a 21-year-old doesn't have power in a house, how? Who? Who has power? Right? But the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars but in ourselves. It's not our laws, not our lawyers, not our judges, not our police, but us. We embody, we enact, and we perpetuate the injustices of patriarchy without any questions. Look what we've become. I really remember more rebellious times. I remember more defiant times. I remember much more austere times. Moving from 4-session weddings to 1 morning ceremony, koville, cotton podave, where we suddenly turn into these Karan Johar extravaganzas. I don't understand. But the thing is that an expensive wedding actually then adds to society's calculation about the value of the girl. Now, the girl is a commodity that you have to give away wealth with, you have to pay for this wedding, you have to do all these things, and therefore, she's ultimately going to cost you more than a boy. So then it feeds back into practices like male child preference. Where are we going with this? It's heartbreaking. I say these things sometimes in a jocular vein, but I'm going to tell you that it just breaks my heart. When I do a series of college workshops, I cannot do anything else in the day because the emotional toll that it takes to have to say to young girls today the things that were axiomatic for me as a child. I can give you the best judiciary, I can give you Ram Rajya. Heck, we're in a government that talks about Ram Rajya, right? We can give you all that. But for each of those things, in every family there is someone who talks about women's roles. You're a girl, you must learn to cook, you must learn to do this, you must learn to do that. No expectation from the boys. Who talks about adjustment, anusarichitipona. In every workplace, when we do a workplace sexual harassment training, we do them a lot. In every workshop, there will be one woman who gets up and says, but what about men if women make false complaints? And usually I'm quite polite. You'd be surprised to know. But every now and then I say, the law is there to protect women from patriarchy. Patriarchy protects men. Men harass women because they think they can get away. They think it's their right. You look at all these films where the hero says, I love you and now therefore you must love me. What is this entitlement? I like you and therefore you must go with me and nobody will call me on it because it is my entitlement to like you. And I can look at all the people whose names have come out in the Me Too allegations. None of them is a one-time offender. What do you think about that? What is it that allows people to do the same wrong thing again and again and again and again and again and again and again with that kind of blitheness? What is it? In every public space, women are supposed to enter apologetically and exit quickly and make as little impact as they can. And if you enter conventions, professional conventions, I'm sure, I will say this, maybe even a notary room with a lot of men and you're the only woman entering and you've come without a spouse or you don't possess a spouse, I'm sure you have that men in a circle and can't enter problem quite often. This is just, we say men will be men and women must continue to defend their rights. Women must be protected. If 2 days ago somebody tweeted about our women and our men and our mothers and our daughters, and the only way in which we can think about women having rights is in the context of women to whom we are related. I don't want to be related to everybody. I'm an introvert. After I finish this public performance, I will need 12 hours of cave time. Is my only right to safety predicated on my being your sister? I don't think so. See, and I also will say that when you have daughters, your thinking shifts. Because then you want everybody to give them the rights they deserve, regardless of whether they are related to them. So what would be my wish list for this year? I'm going to list 3 items, and I have no hope of seeing them happen because we also now have India's most misogynistic government. So, still, you put the intention out in the universe, right? I don't want a Women's Representation Act. I want a Gender Parity in Representation Act. Mandating gender parity in nominations for elections, in seats in every legislature, in cabinets at every level of government. And that also takes into account gender minorities. So men, women, trans people, non-binary people. Let's have a government that looks like us. I want to see penalties for gender-based violence in the election process. One part of it would be no nomination or appointment of anyone, and if they are charge sheeted for gender-based violence, they must resign. No rapist MLAs. No people using state power to accidentally run over the parents of victims, accidentally set fire to something. Let's clean up our house a little bit. And the other part of that would be no nomination or appointment if you walk around making misogynistic speeches. Either your party takes half the population seriously, or you're out. I want women to say this. Chennai South got very lucky this year. We have a feminist MP, but that's an aspiration. But we should be so lucky. And the last thing I want is criminalization of marital rape, because consent is key in every relationship. Entitlement is actually toxic. But above all, I would wish for some searching, quiet conversations about patriarchy in our day-to-day lives. And if somebody wants to ask me why we should talk about patriarchy, I'm happy to tell you. What does it mean? How does it impact all of us across gender and class? Why must we do away with it in order to move ahead? I feel filled with despair. And I also want to add here, I didn't write it down, but when I come to Rotaries and I come to corporate CSR groups, I want you to think about the choices you make when you support causes and charities. And this is not a pitch for supporting us. But there are organizations out there, human rights organizations that do fact-finding work, that file PILs, that organize protests, that are out there watching for our rights every single day, pro bono law cases. And every successive government slaps, freezes their accounts, slaps income tax cases, charges them with sedition, and we lap it up. We don't ask any questions. But if all of them were to disappear, there would be no barrier between us and the state. And the thing that gives you the right to assemble here, 1 week to talk about cancer, 1 week to talk about gender rights, and 1 week to talk about, new technologies, the right to assembly would go. I think you need to think seriously about putting some of your support behind human rights warriors, because they are the final defense between us and any government, not just this one, any government. And then I look, all of this is pessimistic. I look at photos from Shaheen Bagh, from Chennai's Shaheen Bagh in Washermanpet. And all of these women that we would say are ordinary women, we use the word ordinary like a weapon, have just come out of their homes. They have not read legal documents and UN reports. They've come out of their home with a sense that injustice is being done. And they are using their rights as citizens to sit out there day after day, in one of Delhi's worst winters in Shaheen Bagh, and standing up for our rights. And I think I don't have to worry so much. So many of us out there, each of us doing a little bit, what we can, where we can, when we can, tirelessly, relentlessly, courageously, because these days activism comes at a very high cost. And so presumably we shall overcome someday soon. Thank you.